Today, I want to have a little bit of a rant about the 10-point must system and how it's implemented in MMA. I personally don't believe that this system is the problem with MMA scoring, and I want to explain to you in this video why. Now, for any of you that are unfamiliar with the 10-point must system, this is a scoring system that originally was used in boxing that's been brought over to MMA and is one of the main reasons why people believe that there's a problem with MMA scoring. There's a lot of fights that happen where it goes to the judges and people are unhappy with the results and they pin the blame on this scoring system not being the correct one to use in order to judge MMA fights. Now, whilst I will admit that the system is not perfect, I don't personally believe that it is the main issue, so we're going to go over that today. A very brief overview of how the 10-point must system works. Basically, each round is scored individually. So we've got, let's say, 3 rounds, and each round, at the end of that round, the judges needs to write down a score. The winner of that round is going to score 10 points. That's the 10-point must. Someone must score 10 points. So someone will score 10. If the round is close, or even if it's clear that someone's won the round, but nothing decisive happened, like a knockdown, for example, or a very close submission attempt, the round will be a 10-9. Now, if the round was dominant or there was a big knockdown moment or a very close submission, it could be a 10-8. And if the fight was real close to being stopped, really there was a fight ending sequence, then you can get a 10-7, which just basically means that there's a bigger gap between who won it and who lost it. The one with the higher score is going to be the winner of the fight. Now let's get straight into why I don't think this is necessarily the problem. Here's what we need to establish when we're trying to score a fight, regardless of what the discipline is. We need to decide who won the fight. So the first thing we need to clarify is at what point are we going to make that judgment? Now, this is one of the arguments, is that instead of us judging it on a round per round basis, perhaps we could score the fight in its entirety. So instead of just looking at it as who won round 1, who won round 2, who won round 3, it's who won the fight overall. However, I think going down that path actually makes things even more obscure, because now instead of looking at it in chunks and breaking it down into moments, you're trying to look at one very broad picture. I think in terms of trying to judge something live, that's a very difficult thing to do, and it only makes it harder. What having the 3 rounds does and allows the judge to do is to only think about the 5 minutes that they're currently watching, to be able to form an opinion and write it down, and then be able to move on to it and look at the next round with a fresh pair of eyes, ideally speaking. Rather than we get to the end of a 15-minute fight, 25 minutes if we're looking at a championship fight, and then asking that judge to reflect and look back on the first 10 minutes, which by that point is already pretty hazy in someone's memory. Now, yes, they could write notes as they go along, they could probably use fight footage, but like I said, if we're talking about it to work across the board from a small regional fight show to the biggest fights, MMA, UFC, we need something that's going to be able to work across the board. And realistically, I do think scoring on a per round basis is still the correct way to do it. Now, if we've established that we're going to score it on a round per round basis, the next thing we need to determine is who wins each round. Now, whether you used a scoring system of 1 to 3, as in the winner of the round gets 3, the loser of the round gets 2 or 1, that's actually absolutely no different to doing the 10-point must system. You have to determine within a given round who won the round and who lost it. Once you've established that, the next thing to establish is by how much did they win the round. And herein lies the real issue with MMA judging, and it's actually going to be an issue that cannot ever be dealt with or go away, is that it's subjective. Here's the magic word, guys: art. Martial art. Most of you won't know this about me, but I actually went to music school. So my degree was in music, and I remember doing performance exams and always being a little bit bewildered and baffled by the scoring system. Mostly because I considered music to be a very subjective art form. There's certain things that I will listen to and consider a beautiful, stunning piece of music and I'll have a lot of respect for. And there's other things that I'll listen to that I just kind of go, nah, not that keen. That being said, there'll be someone else who might feel the complete flip way about those two pieces of music. They hate the thing I love, they love the thing I hate. And herein lies the issue with judging martial arts contests. There can be obviously some objective elements about it. Who landed the most punches and kicks, who did the most damage, who had the most control time. But at the end of the day, when you're putting all of these elements together and everyone has their own approach, their own artistic impression, it's very difficult to have a purely objective position about who won a fight. Sometimes, in particular when fights are close. When fights are really close, it's going to come down to the eyes of the beholder. The person who's viewing the fight, they're going to have to determine what art form they felt resonated with them the most and was the most effective. So regardless of what our scoring system is, there is always going to be this subjective part of the decision-making process. There is always going to be the human element. And as much as we like to consider it to be a problem, and in some ways it is, the bigger thing is that without it, it's just cold. It's cold numbers, and no one really wants that. It doesn't really mesh with what we're doing here. This is combat. This is a very primal, kind of old school blood and guts sport. So to try and make it something that's completely clinical and purely based off of, well, this guy landed 432, but this guy landed 427, so this guy wins, it's not enough. What about the power? What about how it affected them? What about how they were moving in the space? The takedowns, the submission attempts, the control time on the ground. There is so much more to consider. The reality of it is that MMA is an extremely complicated sport. You're effectively taking 3 different sports, grappling, wrestling, and striking, and you're combining them in together. And whilst we'd like to say that they all carry equal weight, the scoring system at the moment clarifies that effective striking and damage is the #1 scoring criteria, seconded by things like control time and positional dominance, and then third is ring craft, the ability to control the space or lead the fight, and all the other elements that go into it. So we've already established that hitting someone really hard more than they hit you is going to win you the fight above everything else. But if a fight has barely any hitting and it takes place purely grappling, well, we're then looking at a completely different scoring criteria. There is no effective striking to mark. You then need to look at it from the eyes of a BJJ specialist or a wrestling specialist and determine who's doing the most work on the ground. What is the issue then, and how can we fix it? It's education. It's education within judging. It's making sure that the judges really understand what they're looking at across all the different disciplines. The sport of MMA is still very young, so I guarantee you a lot of these judges that are sitting in those chairs, they might have a specialist interest in striking. Maybe they were a boxing judge previously, or a boxing coach. Maybe they were a wrestling coach. Maybe they wrestled in high school. Perhaps they're a BJJ black belt. But you got those 3 judges, there's no guarantee that all 3 of those judges are a college level wrestler with a BJJ black belt who have been doing Muay Thai or kickboxing for the last 20 years. There's just very, very unlikely that that's going to be the case for all these judges. So there's going to be gaps within their knowledge. There's going to be certain positions and certain sequences that happen where they're not truly aware of what they're looking at. You'll hear the audience all the time booing when people are getting into grappling exchanges, and the majority of the time, the reason that's boring to watch is you don't understand what you're looking for. There might be a real battle going on for who's going to secure a certain grip or who's going to pass guard, and it all comes down to whose knee is going to slide by whose knee. But if you can't see these elements as far as you're concerned, it's just 2 people rolling around on the floor. And if a judge doesn't have a firm understanding of that, they might not understand that whilst the guy on top might be on top, he's not necessarily threatening anything, he hasn't hit him with anything effectively, and actually he's really close to being put into a triangle or getting his arm taken or getting reversed and flipped onto the other side. It's complicated is what I'm saying, and what we have to determine is who won the round and by how much they won it, but what we really need is we need the judges to have a better understanding of what all of that means. And my final note on the topic of this is something that would make this far less of a big deal would be fighters no longer getting show and win money, because then the impact of these judges' decisions wouldn't weigh so heavily on the fighters themselves. Whether they win or lose the fight, they should be paid their purse for turning up, doing their training camp, stepping in that cage, making weight, and performing. They should receive their pay, regardless of what other people and external factors such as judges have to say about their performance. Now, obviously, you lose loads of fights, that's going to affect your purse, but then that comes down to you. You win loads of fights, that's going to affect your purse, but it comes down to you. They say don't leave it in the hands of the judges, and whilst that is great advice, it's not really great for the sport for us to say that the worst thing you can do is allow it to go to the officials that have been hired to decide who wins or loses the fights. MMA is already in a better position than boxing in the sense that with boxing, if you've got anything other than an O in the defeated column, you're almost written off. It's the reason why boxers will fight complete cans and these kind of show fights with not real fighters for the first 20 bouts that they have. I know professional boxers that are insanely talented and they are fighting bums, but they're fighting them on purpose because until they have a 20-0 record, they can't get recognized or noticed by anyone. And if on the way up they lose a couple of fights and their record is 17-3, well, that becomes really difficult to market in boxing. MMA doesn't have this issue in the same way. Yes, having a big shiny O does help you, but there's plenty of very successful, very famous MMA fighters that lose fights. So it has, again, less of an impact whether the result goes your way or not in terms of the impact of your overall career. That being said, let's get MMA judges to a higher standard, let them better educated in all three elements of the sport so that they can have a better understanding of what they're looking at and give a more accurate score. And please stop blaming the 10-point must system. Guys, if you enjoyed the video or even if you hated it and wound you up, I'd appreciate if you engage with the content. Click on the like button, leave us a comment down below, tell me how much you hate me and how much I suck, and subscribe to the channel for new videos that are coming every week, and I will see you on the next one.